my name is Neil Shook, and I'm going to be talking about my pilot project, which is called, as Julie said, Prosodic Cues and Predictive Processing of L2 German Case Marking. And before I get started, I just want to thank everybody, so I don't run out of time at the end if I do. I need to thank my advisor, Dr. Jackson, who's been extremely helpful through everything. My advisor in Braunschweig, Dr. Holger Hoff. My project is also kind of a continuation of something that Nick and Jack worked on a lot, so I need to thank them profusely. And also everything that CLS has done. So of course PIRE, and also I was awarded a Judith F. Kroll Undergraduate Research Award so that I got to do additional research while I was there for my thesis, in addition to this project. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of those groups before I get started. So as you might guess, I went to Germany this summer. Specifically, I went to Braunschweig, Germany, which on this map is kind of blurry, but you can see Braunschweig is in red and it's between Hanover and Berlin. And while I was there, I was working at the Technische Universität in Braunschweig with Dr. Holger Hoff, and overall I had an incredible experience. I got to participate in research abroad, which was amazing. I got to work with a bunch of faculty, a bunch of grad students, and make friends. So you can see I did make friends. And this is at a really cool event called T-Unite, and this was kind of an outreach into the community where the university opened its doors and shared its research with the community. There were all sorts of booths and interactive events, and I thought that was a really cool opportunity that I got to participate in while I was there. Also, fun fact, we come from Penn State. Nittany Lions is a lion statue. When I was in Germany, Braunschweig, I learned, is known as the City of Lions because apparently a king lived there, had a pet lion, and so there's also a lion statue in Braunschweig. So that was pretty cool. So yes, overall great experience. I got to do a lot of research, and I got to use my language skills. So let us first talk about the language that I use, German. So in German, German marks case on article. So this means that the article of nouns change depending on whether the noun is the subject or the object of a sentence. So for example, we'll take the masculine noun Hahn, which means rooster. If Hahn is the subject of the sentence, it gets der, which marks it from nominative case for the subject. So you would say, for example, der Hahn frisst gleich die Blume, which means the rooster will soon eat the flower. The rooster is the subject, so it gets der. Alternatively, if Hahn is the object, as in the second sentence, it gets marked with den. So der Fuchs frisst gleich den Hahn means the fox will soon eat the rooster. Again, this is the object marking the accusative marking, so it gets den. Because German does this, the word order is more flexible than it is in English. So it is possible in German to flip that second sentence around and say, den Hahn frisst gleich der Fuchs. As you can see, it's exactly reversed as the second sentence, but because the case markings are the same, it means the same thing. It still means the fox is eating the rooster. And as you might expect, coming from English, these object-first sentences are more difficult to process for someone who is learning German. So my project focuses on how we can get native English speakers to process this better. And in order to do this, we're going to be looking at prosodic cues. So prosody is something that people use in natural speech to convey meaning on top of the words and sentences that they're using. So for example, prosody is things like emphasis, or like to express doubt. You can do that with prosody. So prosodic cues include intonation, stress, tone, rhythm, things like that. And specifically, we're going to be looking at contrasted prosody. So in an OVS sentence, a German speaker probably wouldn't say this as like monotone. They would probably emphasize the object in the first position, which is not normal. So they might say something like den Hahn frisst gleich der Fuchs. I said it badly, but they would emphasize the object in the first position as an additional cue. This is a weird object for a sentence. So we're going to see if these prosodic cues can help L2 native speakers, or L2 German speakers, be able to process case better. So this leads to my research question: does contrasted prosody facilitate the use of German case marking and real-time language processing among L2 German speakers? So in order to do this, we used a visual world paradigm, kind of similar to the first presentation. And so participants sat at a computer screen, and we recorded where they were looking on the screen as they heard sentences. The sentences were either subject-first sentences or object-first sentences. So, for example, in a subject-first sentence, they would hear der Hahn frisst gleich die Blume. We expect them first to look at the rooster and then look over to the flower. In an object-first sentence, they would hear den Hahn frisst gleich der Fuchs. We expect them first to look at the rooster and then look up to the agent, the fox. You can see the difference between these sentences. The first noun phrase is the same, the verb is the same. The only difference is the role of the second object. So is it the agent of the sentence, is it doing the action, or is it the patient, is it being eaten in this case? So a study that this was based on found that L1 German speakers can use case marking to predict upcoming sentence elements. So a native German speaker can hear der Hahn frisst gleich, already know that that's the subject of the sentence, and already start looking at the flower before they even hear it. A native German speaker can also hear in the object first case, den Hahn frisst gleich, know that that's the object, and already start looking at the fox, the agent, because they know it's coming, because they process that case marking and can use it to predict what's coming next. So we're going to see if contrastive prosody helps L2 speakers be able to also predict what's coming next. So the setup for my experiment was kind of twofold. So the first experiment is a continuation of Jack Domidia's pilot study in 2015, and this had two blocks. The first block used contrastive prosody in OVS sentences, and the second block used neutral prosody the whole time. And this is great, except it's kind of hard to tell the effects specifically from contrastive prosody versus the effects of just doing the task over and over. So in order to kind of combat that and more precisely identify what contrastive prosody does, we set up kind of the same experiment except just reverse the block. So the new experiment that I ran was block 1 with neutral prosody and block 2 with contrastive prosody. The participants I got while I was there were actually L1 English, L2 German speakers. I went to Germany so that we got participants who are more exposed to the language and are usually more proficient. All of them were at an intermediate to advanced L2 proficiency. While I was there, I conducted, or I ran a few participants in addition to Jack's participants that he had already ran in experiment 1. So we have 15 total in that experiment. And I had 8 participants for experiment 2. So those are the results I'm going to share. So for these results, we're going to look at these complicated eye tracking graphs. So I'll kind of walk you through what we're going to be looking at. So on the x-axis is time. And this will tell us where we are in the sentence. So at the beginning, this is the beginning of the sentence, and then we go on. The y-axis is the proportion of looks to various items in the sentence. So the solid liner looks to the agent, the fox, and the dotted liner looks to the patient, the flower in the example. And this is also split into SVO, which are red, and OVS sentences, which are blue. And so a higher bar indicates more looks to various objects. And this is kind of complicated. There are a lot of lines on this graph, so I'm going to specifically point to 2 things that we're going to look at in this graph. One, that we're going to look at the split in looks to the agent-patient in SVO sentences. So the split between the dotted line and the solid line in the red indicates when participants have made an interpretation and kind of decided, okay, I know what's coming next, so I'm going to start looking at the correct thing, the solid line, which is the flower. So that's the first thing we're going to look at when that happens. And we're also going to be looking at any incorrect looks to the patient in OVS sentences. So native English speakers always have the subject first in their L1. So if they go by this kind of informal rule, say the subject is always first, they may be tempted to say the flower's coming next, even though the fox is actually coming. So if they kind of have the subject first bias, the solid line of blue will be above the dotted line until they realize, uh-oh, I got that wrong, and then actually look at the correct object, the dotted line. So we're going to be looking if the dotted blue, or the solid blue line is above the dotted blue line. And that will indicate that they had a subject first bias, and hopefully this will be reduced with contrastive prosody, or that's what we might predict. So if we get to the actual results, experiment 1, again, block 1 was contrastive prosody, and block 2 was neutral prosody. And this is again 15 participants. As you can see, the split in the SVO sentences, so the split in the red lines, is actually later in the contrastive prosody block than it is in the neutral prosody block. And we can also see a subject first bias, which is present in the second block, the neutral prosody block, but it is not present in the first block. So that's what I got for experiment 1. Experiment 2. This time, block 1 was neutral prosody and block 2 was contrastive prosody. We had 8 participants, so these look a little bit more wavy. But still we can kind of see a trend. So you can see the split in the red line is not as clear, and it happens earlier in both than experiment 1. Also, there's no difference between block 1 and block 2. As you can see, it splits earlier, but then they're not as confident about their interpretation at first. And then, again, we can see a subject-first bias, which is evident in block 2, as in we can see the solid blue line above the dotted blue line in the second block, but not in the first block. And this is similar to experiment 1, where we found the subject-first bias only present in block 2, regardless of prosody type. So what can we conclude from all of these graphs? So we can say that contrastive prosody does not seem to eliminate subject-first bias in OVS sentences. So even though they have this additional cue of contrastive prosody, it doesn't necessarily eliminate subject-first bias, because we found subject-first bias in block 2 in both experiments, regardless of prosody type. We can say that contrastive prosody does cause participants to wait longer to make a decision, so that split in the red line about age and patient roles in SVS sentences, one presented in block 1. So only when it was in block 1, at the beginning of the task, did this cause it to wait longer. And when it was introduced in block 2, the contrastive prosody, it made no difference in the time, and they were also kind of less confident overall throughout the experiment. About the interpretation that they made. So what does this say? Going back to a research question, can contrastive prosody actually help language learners process difficult L2 morphosyntactic cues? Yes and no. So we may have predicted that contrastive prosody eliminates subject-first bias. We didn't find that. We also didn't find that it helps them predict, like L1 speakers, what's coming next. However, we did find some sort of effect of contrastive prosody. So we did find that contrastive prosody helps L2 comprehenders develop a strategy in a new task for real-time interpretation. And namely, the strategy is to wait longer to make an interpretation, and this, in OVS sentences, waiting longer will actually probably lead to more correct initial interpretations. And if they wait, be more confident in their initial interpretations, they would probably have to reinterpret sentences less, and overall this would lead to a more efficient L2 processing strategy than without the contrastive prosody. So, so teachers, if they use contrastive prosody in this new morphosyntactic cue, i.e. case marking in German, they could benefit the processing strategy of their students. So that's all I found. So last thing, thank you again. Thanks for coming and listening. And that's it. Thanks.
So there is time for a couple of questions.
Yes.
Thank you. This is very interesting study. I have a question about your material. So in your subject first sentence, you seem to have, in your example at least, an inanimate patient. So the bloom. Die Blume.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm totally mixing languages here. Die Blume, which can never do the eating.
Right.
Whereas in your object first sentences, you had two animate
Yes.
patient and agent. So you're basically introducing an additional ambiguity as who is doing the eating.
Right. In most of the sentences, actually, I believe everything was animate, if I remember correctly. At least everything, I think, was balanced as best we could with animate and inanimate. Definitely the first noun phrase was a definite intermediate between the two doing the actions. But yes, that's a good point. The intermediate, or the inanimate is animate distinction.
But I think it's also the case, in all cases, it was unambiguous. If you look at the constellation of nouns, it's always unambiguous. Rooster can never eat a fox.
Well, yeah, no, it's less likely. But the flower will absolutely never be able to eat the fox, right? If you have a dead fox and a hungry rooster.
If you go start with the rooster first, then maybe you'll bring up the dead fox.
You don't want to know what roosters eat.
Yes.
Neil, I have a follow-up question also on the very interesting study also on the materials. Follow-up question to Jeanette's. So, were on the same idea, were the materials normed so that it was clear to people that foxes, or is that or foxen was the plural?
Foxes.
For foxes. Normally eat roosters, but not vice versa.
No.
Because you,
Yeah,
but
yes,
because you.
I mean, it was, these are also,
Oh,
this is
oh.
also the third or fourth
Yeah.
study that has used all of these items.
Oh, okay. So they were
So
all
that-
norms, so that people. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
They were normed, but the participants themselves didn't have any sort of introduction to that because
Yeah.
You introduced them to the nouns, you named each
Right,
noun in the
right, yeah.
picture before each item.
yeah. But yes, they were norms.
And can I ask one last question?
Yes.
So how often is this contrastive prosody present in these speakers' regular environment used in this way?
Yeah.
Because it may be that it's not necessarily that the contrastive prosody, is, so you find results that are mixed, but it could be because it's not a cue that at this level they normally pay attention to. Because in whatever environment they have, in this particular use of contrastive prosody is not quite present. But other uses of contrastive prosody that are much more prevalent in the input might be something that they implicitly learn. So the question is, how often do you think that these speakers are exposed to contrastive prosody used in this particular way?
In this particular way versus contrastive prosody just overall.
Well, because you use contrastive prosody in the accusative, right?
Yes. Mhm.
In the accusative, when the accusative noun comes first.
Yes.
Right. So that's the question.
Okay. So I would say
In their
um,
environment.
Yeah, I would say native German speakers, when they're doing something that's object first, I would say, I don't want to say often they use this contrastive prosody, but I think it would sound very unnatural for a native German speaker to say it very monotone and not kind of give this additional cue, just because German is SVO normally, so it just is kind of strange. They have it kind of reversed, and they don't use this contrastive prosody. So I don't want to say it's common, but I think it's used in native German speakers naturally, and so learners would hear it in this context in
So,
OVS
I think the
sentences.
bigger issue is that they're not going to hear object first sentences at all.
So
But if they're going to hear an object first sentence, it's going to have the contrastive prosody.
Consistent, but not frequent.
Correct.
This Julie's question actually relates to the theoretical model, competition model, which
Right.
you are actually calculating the Q availability and versus reliability.
Exactly.
And I believe there has been some work done, even in German, to look at sort of causality cues versus
Oh, yeah.
the sentence
body
order.
composition.
So it might be worthwhile to think more theoretically in terms of how these cues actually are contributing to
Yeah.
native versus non-native
Yeah.
process.
Yes.
John?
Here's the demo involved. So, I'm wondering, you picked the flower as being inanimate, obviously, so it's not a question of who's eating what. But, in my field work, I spend probably as much time with roosters as I do with human participants. I watch them eat seeds and I watch them eat bugs. I've never seen a rooster eat a flower. So I'm wondering, is that some kind of a distractor that could actually throw people off, or did it just deliberately, or was it just happened?
Well, in this example, I think realistically the only thing the chicken or the rooster could be eating was the flower, because the rooster would definitely not be eating the fox, and it definitely wouldn't be eating off of the tree. So I think all of our examples made it clear which one was going to be eaten and which one could be the eater.
No, I understand that. I'm just wondering if there was some, plausibly, the answer could be none of the above. And whereas if you had a bug or a piece of corn or something, see what I'm saying?
Right, but in our sentences, all of our sentences, even the Philo trials, used noun phrases that were all on the screen, so they can kind of assume as they go throughout the task, all of these, or everything that they're going to hear is on the screen. So realistically, yes, a chicken might not eat a flower all the time, but that was the only plausible thing in the sentence, or on the screen.
All right. Neil, thank you very much.